No attorney should be without a.
Well, it's a lawyers committee card here, okay? That's me.
Everything is coming together, sort of.
Richard tried to constrain me, but some people who are here said that this had to be on display.
Yeah. I got an idea, though.
So yes,
if it was behind the cameras, we'll be looking right into the cameras.
Behind the cameras. So you're looking at it, but not the cameras.
We'll be looking at the cameras. Thus, we'll be looking at this too.
But the cameras won't be looking at it at all.
9/11.
But they won't be looking at it if it's on the side.
9/11 inquiry.
We want it in the video, right?
Do you?
I think so.
See?
You changed your mind.
Okay, so gentlemen, the live stream has begun because it's 1 o'clock. So who will speak first? Richard, will you speak first?
Not sure how this is going to go today.
Not sure.
We're quite excited about the opportunity to get the evidence into the record in discovery. I mean, for the first time, really. This is amazing, and it's all the work of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, Dave Meiswinkle, Mick Harrison, and all the other great lawyers there. They have been relentless.
What we did, Jason, Richard, the founder of Architects and Engineers, they assembled and put together for the past 10 years an amazing array of scientific forensic evidence that conclusively shows that the World Trade Center towers came down through pre-planted explosives, controlled demolition bombs, and that was packaged by the Lawyers Committee and put into the grand jury petition, which was up and down in New York City in the Southern District. And it's our understanding that a grand jury is being convened or has been convened to consider that evidence for the first time. In addition, we've submitted to them a supplement. It's called People with Material Information. And there's a supplement that is public, and there's a supplement that's secret, being that's the secret one is the one that we want them to consider in depth. So we're here today in a new action. This is an historical action, and it's really opening up the process in a way that hasn't been before. We've transcended now New York City to an extent. And what we're doing is a lawsuit under the Administrative Procedure Act and the Federal Mandamus Act. And what it does, it calls for declaratory relief and an injunctive relief. And what that means is we want the judge or the courts to decide that the evidence that we're putting forth or the cause of action is a legitimate cause of action, and we want them to order the FBI to do certain things. Now, what the FBI has to do is under the 9/11 Review Commission, they were supposed to assess any evidence that was available to them that relates back to the crimes in any way of 9/11 crimes, and they were supposed to make an assessment and eventually present that to the 9/11 Review Commission, and that this is evidence that was not considered by the original 9/11 Commission. And what we've done now, we have a 7-count complaint. The first count has to do with the World Trade Center pre-planted explosive evidence. That's which is in the original petition for a grand jury. But it has evidence of what we call the high fivers, or the FBI calls, and these were people in New Jersey that were filming the event, the crime as it went down, and were eventually arrested in New Jersey. And there are large files that the FBI have on that the 9/11 investigation or the original 9/11 committee did not know about. So, in other words, the FBI had a responsibility to assess this information and to give it to the commission to consider it. And it's a legislative mandate. It's not something arbitrary. It's something that Congress is involved with, and they want that report. They want to be reported to also. In addition, it has a count having to do with destruction of evidence, because that's our understanding. Just when this was happening, when there was a mandate to do this assessment, the pictures may have been destroyed. All right, so we want an accounting of there. There's also an account there having to do with the Saudi financing. There is a civil litigation now that's discovered 3 tranches of evidence, which seems like a voluminous evidence that was never considered by the original 9/11 Commission. There is evidence having to do with cameras in the Pentagon, not too far from where we stand now. A lot of people don't know there were cameras there that had to have recordings, and those recordings have never, to our knowledge, have never been made public. There's a section on plane parts. There's the plane parts, individual parts, often many of them have serial numbers, and we want to have disclosed those serial numbers and those plane parts in a process of an assessment made by the FBI. What's the import of that? Because that would identify what hit the Pentagon. If a plane hit the Pentagon, it would tell us what plane hit the Pentagon through the serial numbers. The same with in New York, and the same in Shanksville.
Now, David, let me just ask you this, because I think people are wondering. You've got the action that's happening in the Southern District of New York. That's to open a grand jury to investigate all the evidence. This is a new matter compelling the FBI to actually investigate. Give us just the specifics again, briefly. What's different and
what's very significant, this is a lawsuit. What's happening in New York is we have petitioned the government to do what they're supposed to do. This is we're actually suing the FBI and the Department of Justice for failure to do what they're supposed to do. And we're asking the court to rule that, yes, they had an obligation to assess this evidence. They had an obligation to present it to the 9/11 Review Commission and to Congress. And this is evidence that was never considered by the original 9/11 Commission that convened in 2002 and then ended in 2004.
And so do you feel that there's a better chance for this to compel the FBI to act, or how do you feel about what's happening today?
Yeah, I feel that it's a very strong action. Another part of the complaint had to do with cell phone communications. A lot of people don't realize that the whole cell phone communication interpretation changed from cell phones earlier on to air phones later on, and that became out in the Meiswinkle trial, where a very important call from Barbara Olson, the Solicitor General's wife, the FBI said it was never really made. And he said he got 4 calls from her. So this is information that was never considered by the original 9/11 Commission. So we want an assessment, which Congress is supposed to do, and say, what happened here? Why has this changed? Why did we go from cell phones to air phones? Why is this call never happened? So that's in part. So the drama here, or the significance, is that it opens up the case. As you can see, plane parts connect Shanksville, New York City, and the Pentagon. What planes actually were down there? If you look at what happened in Shanksville, what plane parts it was nothing hardly there. Of course, they did find things. We want to make sure that was Flight 93 there. In the Pentagon, we want to make sure it was American Flight 77. In the Twin Towers, we want to make sure it was American Flight 11 and United Flight 175. All right, so we're talking about a confirmation in the sense the FBI makes an assessment. Here's a list of the plane parts. We have them. The public's never seen them, and Congress has never seen them, and wants to have the report, etc. And certainly, most importantly, the 9/11 Commission, when they made their determination, weren't aware of it. So this is new information between 2004 to 2014 that the FBI was aware of, and they've been ordered now to make an assessment of that and report to the 9/11 Review Commission and to Congress this information that was never considered originally. What it does is it opens up everything. It's a brand new ballgame if the judge allows the case to go on.
Now, let me ask you this. As we stand here on March 25th, 2019, it's just one day after Robert Mueller's released his report on the Russiagate findings, and he's found no collusion. So we now realize that Robert Mueller's been investigating for 2 years, no evidence. Of course, Robert Mueller was the FBI director starting September 4th, 2001. He also failed to properly investigate evidence in this matter. Do you feel that the outcome in the Russiagate investigation will have any kind of impact on what Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry is trying to do and what architects and engineers are trying to do?
Well, it's an interesting interesting thought, and I really haven't thought about it because we've still been involved getting this out. Everything has to be considered in historical context. It really has to be. Even the fact that the grand jury is supposedly going on in New York right now as we talk, in the Southern District. Why did that happen now? We're talking about 19 years later. We're talking about most egregious, or 18 years later, most egregious crime that ever committed in the country. Why they're doing something now, who knows? But what we're saying here is this lawsuit, we're not depending on the U.S. Attorney to do his job. We're depending on hopefully the courts to order the FBI to do their job. So this is a declaratory action for injunctive relief. The injunction is the courts to say, do your job. The same with the petition up in New York. We're asking the U.S. Attorney. And everywhere we look with 9/11, it seems like there was a failure of very professional organizations not to do their job on that day. That particular day seemed like hardly anybody was doing their job.
Now, of course, on September 11th, 2001, Donald Trump was just a real estate developer and a New Yorker, but he did famously say that he expected there were bombs in the building. Do you think having Donald Trump as president has any impact on what you're trying to do with this?
Well, I think that Donald Trump, his initial assessment is a correct assessment. I mean, this is a man who builds skyscrapers. I mean, he's not, to that statement is more of an advantage than being a politician. If I'm a person that builds skyscrapers and I understand how they're built and I understand how they can come down and what it takes to bring them down. So his initial reaction was that. And so I think that's, it bodes better than if he had said something different, all right?
Right.
So I don't know the politics involved here, and certainly there is very powerful politics, and we're not saying who did what. We're saying in the grand jury, here's some of the facts. You tell us, you do the investigation, never an investigation. Here we are saying to the judge, these are facts. The FBI never did this, and if you agree with us, then order them to do it. And again, that's just to make an assessment of this important information, including the information that Richard Gage was involved with, and architects and engineers, all that valuable information that was at ground zero having to do with the collapse of those buildings or the destruction or explosion of those buildings.
Absolutely, and the work that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth has been doing for the past 17, 18 years has been at the really cutting edge of everyone's understanding the thermite evidence. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Richard? Maybe some people are just waking up for the first time and learning about architects and engineers. What do you expect to come of this lawsuit?
Yeah, this is an important and historic lawsuit, Jason. What we've got is the opportunity to take the evidence that we've assembled over the last dozen years and get it into discovery, because the FBI was responsible for assessing the evidence that they acknowledged having seen. In fact, Michael Heimbach, Assistant Chief Counterterrorism Division of FBI, the FBI, he actually said that our theory, as he called it, was backed by thorough research and analysis.
Theory, architects and engineers theory.
Correct. And that's why we have assembled, we had assembled this in our documentary in 2008, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. This, this presentation was reviewed by the FBI. So they were, by law, by congressional mandate, required to assess it and submit it to the 9/11 Review Commission. Now, they didn't do that because it doesn't appear in their report. This is compelling evidence, as they acknowledge themselves. So we have every legal what's the word? Give me a word, Dave.
Mandate? Precedent?
Right, to have it included. They were obligated to have it included. So, and it wasn't. So what do we have in there? We have the evidence for World Trade Center Building 7, the third tower that came down on 9/11, in the afternoon of 9/11, after witnesses hear explosions. This building drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. this is free fall acceleration, as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. So what we have is the evidence for explosive controlled demolition. The evidence is in the forensic evidence too, which shows evidence of thermite incendiaries. Now we bring that over to the Twin Towers, which the FBI also saw this evidence, and we have evidence for the explosive demolition of the Twin Towers. Now Bobby McIlvaine was in the Twin Towers when these explosions happened, and I'd like to introduce his father here, Bob McIlvaine, who's the inspiration behind the Bobby McIlvaine Act, which we've been taking to legislators now, trying to get them to sponsor it for a couple of years at least. Actually 10 years since the very beginning. But the Bobby McIlvaine Act is draft legislation which would force a real investigation into the destruction of all three towers. Bob, can you say more about the opportunity you have here?
Well, the opportunity is tremendous, but I've been doing this forever, and I am optimistic, but I am pessimistic, if you understand what I'm saying. But just to clarify about Bobby, Bobby, I'm 100% sure he died walking into the building.
This is the live stream camera.
And really, because I jumped on board with architects and engineers, I looked into it so much, because we found Bobby the next day. We took him to the pathologist, or the ambulance took him to the pathologist, so he had a post-mortem examination on Tuesday the 12th. And of course, so we could never figure out exactly what happened. He was found immediately.
Let's do that later. That's a great idea. I didn't understand what you meant.
Running into Richard Gage, and it's that whole movement of architects and engineers, and my investigation also, Bobby was walking into the building. He didn't work in the buildings. He worked at Merrill Lynch across the street. And he was vice president of media relations. He just started the job a month before. But he was living up on 66th Street and 2nd Avenue. So he took the subway down, came down to Fulton. And so I think what happened, he was walking through to cut through to get to Merrill Lynch. And by the nature of his injuries, specifically the chest and the head, it was, you know, they talk about explosions. I'd rather say a big-time detonation. The 9/11 Commission report, they spent one little line, I think it's on page 242. A fireball came down, a powerful fireball came down one elevator shaft, which was 50, because they couldn't have possibly come down the others because they have mechanical rooms to stop everything. You have, you know, if you go up the towers, you have to get off, go through the mechanical room, then get to the next elevator up. So what they explain in the 9/11 report, commission report, this fireball came down and did all this damage on the 72nd floor, 22nd floor. The lobby was just blown apart. Before, even the PATH station was blown up. So one fireball doing this is an absolute impossibility. And this is the 9/11 Commission report, and they don't even mention Building 7. So this is one little line that took maybe 30 seconds to write in the 9/11 Commission report. That's when I decided to become a very, not radical, but very outspoken critic of this government. The fact that we could have an investigation of that on my son's death and spend one line describing what happened. And it's not even close. And of course, that's what Richard came, when he finally came out with all this. It's just self-explanatory. So it's not a matter of who did it or why I did it, but the fact is, I can say honestly, and I will, I go around the world talking about that, Muslims had nothing to do with my son's death. And we're killing millions of Muslims. Because unless we can prove they put the detonations or the explosions in there, then they're out of the picture, as far as my son's death's concerned. And that's my story. That's what I want people to hear. So at least they can start thinking about, gee, something really happened here. And they got to start, but they just don't want to put the time in, or they can't put the time in. So that's it. So I'm very happy about this, the fact that I'm a plaintiff going against the FBI. And the thing is, the FBI, we're talking about Mueller. I mean, that's why he was hired back in the 90s, to cover up for Iran-Contra. He's a hitman as far as covering up things. That's why he was brought in. I was with the Jersey girls when we went down to see him once. And I was so livid, I really wanted to hit him. Because he says, there's nothing to see here. I mean, here we're all, down here talking about 9/11. There's nothing to see here. It just passes along like. And I remember the FBI agents there. They came up to me. I really had to, be restrained. I was so ticked off, and they were so nice. But everybody knows this, but we just can't get it out there. The press, the TV, it's a matter that people just gotta want to know what happened. And if you don't want to know that, then it's so impossible.
Now, Bob, I was unaware of Robert Mueller's role in Iran-Contra. What was he doing with Iran-Contra?
He was he was the assistant district attorney. And well, they covered it up. I don't know if you know Iran-Contra. I won't go into the whole story about that. But he was assigned to cover it, or he was district attorney.
Right, well, and of course, William Barr was the Attorney General when that was all happening.
Oh, was it? Oh, I didn't know.
William Barr was the Attorney
General,
and Robert Mueller was the Assistant Attorney General.
Well, and look at and they're the same people that are around now.
Well, Mueller was brought in as the FBI chief.
That's going forward to 2001. I'm saying in 1993.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
William Barr was the Attorney General under Herbert Walker Bush, where Robert Mueller was the Assistant Attorney General. And so how do you feel, Bob, now that we're just one day after Robert Mueller's much ballyhooed Russia investigation has basically fallen flat? Do you think that'll play a role in this renewed interest in investigating 9/11?
No.
You don't think that'll have any impact?
I think it's all bullshit. It really does. The whole thing on Russia, we just, they want to keep a boogeyman around. That's all they want to do. It's, I heard you mention the other day, the deep state. What is the deep state? Right? And Russia, since World War I's been,
It's Robert Mueller's bowling team, no?
Yeah. Well, right. And say all these people are from Iran-Contra. I mean, that's a good starting point for 9/11. What these people, Panak and then neocons and so forth and so on, that they have the power now. You think Trump has power, but I don't know why he hired all these people. But the thing is, that's what we have to look at. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you feel like this new action? Do you think you'll finally see justice for your son?
I found justice myself because I know. I've worked so hard on it, and that's the most important thing for me. And my relatives are starting to fall. It just takes time. If you don't have the time to really jump into this, and I look at it this way: people don't want to think that their parents are evil. They would do evil things, and the people in this country don't want that too. And you have to work hard. And if you don't work hard on it, my relatives, I have relatives in Ohio. They don't want to look at this. They really don't want to. My son, he doesn't have the time to look at it. He supports me. My wife, she never wanted any parts of this, but because of Richard, she jumped on board because the science of the buildings falling really made sense to her. And it does. My sister called me. She's been telling people. She's really getting involved. But it's the science of what Richard has been talking about, because that's very logical. And then the 9/11 Commission report doesn't even mention Building 7, and they just give me one line. That's how my son was murdered. Well, a fireball came down, all those floors, blowing up all over the place. And, and Bobby didn't get hit by a fireball is another thing. He died from, and a detonation is a very powerful, and heat follows it. So wherever, I think he was walking in, he got hit by a powerful, powerful detonation.
Blast where?
Well, he had, especially, his chest, that glass all, his whole chest was obliterated from glass. That's why I figured that's what happened.
So certainly if it was just burning jet fuel, dropping liquid down an elevator shaft, you wouldn't have those type of impact.
And not saying it didn't happen, that liquid gas came running down, kerosene came running down, but the way they explain it, I mean, it's a miracle, it suddenly stops at 77, blows out the floor, Well, I think Bobby was a smart boy, he's a Princeton graduate. If he was walking in there and there was a plane coming in, I certainly know he would run. Everybody would have run. It couldn't take a fireball, 1 second, a millisecond to come down to the lobby level and then keep going. So that's why he knew, he had no idea what happened, absolutely no idea what happened. He died instantly, and that's...
Do you feel like the action that's being brought by the Lawyers Committee is going to make a change? Will we see something happen?
Well, I don't know what kind of change it's going to make. It's like evolution. Changes don't happen in a week. Changes don't happen in a year. Changes don't happen in 10 years. But the fact that this keeps getting out, and I've heard from people around the world. So it's all there, but people have to find out, what do I do? How do I do this? They go in their community, you get ostracized. A friend of my son, he really wanted to get involved in it. But I said, you know, you're going to really suffer, you know, because your wife, his wife wasn't involved in it. So, you know, I've known people that got divorced because of this. So it's really difficult because, you know, you're saying that your mom and dad's bad.
You mean the government?
Yeah.
People see the government as
well, that's it's like saying your mom and dad are bad people, you know what I mean? And people don't want to hear that. So it's no, but you got to put the work in. It's like Richard. That's why Richard's so easy, you know, because it's science, and that's what convinced my wife. You know, the science of.
That's why
she didn't want to hear about it, you know.
That's why I got into it, Bob, because the science doesn't lie.
Yeah.
It's irrefutable. And it was a cakewalk. When I got into this 12 years ago, I was saying to myself, my God, every architect that listens to this is going to be able to see it. The problem is that most of them don't want to look at the evidence in the first place. So but we've been talking to as many as we can. We now have 3,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. If 3,000 architects told you in writing that your house was going to come down, would you listen to them? If it was in danger of collapse? Yeah, we would listen to them. But since this has to do with the baggage associated with 9/11, where we were all so traumatized so deeply, then, as you've been highlighting here, people have an inherent need to protect themselves from the pain that they suffered and the shock and awe of that day. So people can't even imagine, A, they don't want to go there because of the pain. B, they can't imagine that elements within our government and industry could be so diabolical as to set charges in an occupied building and then bring these buildings down, murdering could have been a lot more than 3,000 people. And so they just can't imagine that's a lie that would be so big that they couldn't handle it emotionally or mentally. So they just immediately label us conspiracy theorists. Well, we're done with those labels. We're in the court. In fact, Dave will tell us from the Lawyers Committee the perspective about why the U.S. Attorney has agreed to impanel a grand jury to investigate the evidence that we're talking about.
Right. Well, in part it's because the evidence is reasonable, rational, and it should be presented. He doesn't have an option, really, under the law. He has an obligation under the law. I think part of it is historical because of the context we live in today. But I think the other part is that it's well overdue, and maybe there are some good people inside that acknowledge, after all these years, the crime that was never properly addressed. So why he's doing it, we don't know what his motivations are. They could be very good motivations. They could be political expediencies. But the reason, the most important reason, is because the evidence is overwhelming for controlled demolitions in New York City. It's a hypothesis that was never considered at any time. The office fires caused by jet fuel is the official story up to now. That's a fairy tale. It's a lie. It's not accurate at all. Now, I have a background as a police officer, and any police officer that's listening here, I would strongly advise you to go on the Architects and Engineers website, AE911truth.org, or the Lawyers Committee website, LC4911.org, and look at the buildings. There are exhibits in our grand jury petition. Watch them come down and tell me that's not explosions. And same with the firemen. And I would ask anybody, even people in the FBI that know better, and in the intelligence agencies that know better, and in the military that know better, that in 9/11 and September 11, 2001, our Constitution and our way of life was hijacked, just as those planes were allegedly hijacked. and we've reached now a crossroads crossroads here that we have to hopefully take the right path for our country to get itself back. Our country's heart and soul was ripped out in 9/11, as Richard said, incredible trauma. How could people do something so terrible, so heinous? It was done, and history is replete with instances similar where these type of things happen. So what we've done now in just these two actions, the one is to get the grand jury moving. That covers New York City and that area. This action here covers everything regarding to 9/11. It will bring in, if you look at the counts, with the plane parts, the various crime scenes, the photographs right here at the Pentagon, the cell phone communications, especially from the planes, well, all the planes, but especially the plane in Pennsylvania, that's United 93, and also the American 77 here in Washington, D.C. So it's a first step. Now, the Lawyers Committee is established. The mission is transparency and accountability. So by doing these actions, we are trying to encourage transparency and accountability in government. And so our dream, I think, or we would like to see a number of grand jury going, not just one in New York, but maybe one in Pennsylvania, one down here in Virginia or Washington or whatever. And eventually, if we're allowed to proceed, if we get the funding to do that, and anybody who wants to contribute can go to lc4911.org, we'll do that. We'll do the best we can to assemble the evidence and do the job that the government should have been doing all along.
Now, David, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So, you're a lawyer, of course, but in your previous role as a police officer, you're obviously very familiar with evidence collection procedures, chain of custody, etc. What can you say about the way the crime scene was handled on 9/11? It seemed they were more focused on clearing away what was being treated as wreckage than they were focused on preserving evidence.
Well, that's a good assessment. I think it's an accurate assessment. The first thing you learn in the police academy is protect the scene. The first thing that I think the firemen learn about is the spoliation of evidence to protect the scene, to check for explosives, check for incendiaries, and things of that nature. And particularly in New York City, the metal it would be indicative of many things, and Richard could tell you about that, but sulfidation of metal means very high temperatures, perforation of the metal, very high temperatures, bending of metal that can't be bent, and the normal office fires, even office fires caused by gasoline from a jet fuel, gasoline in an airplane. The temperatures there are about 1,800 degrees. To start to melt steel, you need 2,700 or more degrees. The temperatures there, you having molten metal, the incredibly high temperatures. I went up there 2 months later to the crime scene, and I walked around the perimeter, and it was still smoking. I was startled. How can it be still smoking 2 months later? And I was handed a mask to wear to filter the fumes. And later on, I did some research, and I found out about nanothermite, how it can be burned underwater. I found out that the firemen were saying there was pools, well, like a lake down there, but they couldn't put it out. It didn't go out to naturally. It extinguishes itself in December. 3 months it was lit, and Richard may want to comment on that, on the nanothermite. They have excellent peer review article that was done, a study by Stephen Jones and Niels Harritz and Kevin Ryan, that document that use very sophisticated electronic equipment, and in fact that information is now all in the federal government. That information was never shared that we know of with the 9/11 Commission.
The thermite evidence.
The thermite, never. None of this explosive evidence, because they took the theory that fires brought it down. Now, fire had never brought a building down, a high-rise steel structure building. It can't alone from fire. It can't. What brings it down is detonation, controlled demolitions, bombs, and things of that nature.
And certainly the thermite evidence, the work that's been done by architects and engineers and your colleagues, Richard, there's no other explanation. What would thermite be doing there? Is it ever used in the construction of buildings, or is there any use for thermite that could be explained?
Oh yeah, all the time. Just kidding. The work here is largely the group of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones and others who have found in all of their 8 or 7 independently collected samples of the dust around World Trade Center 7, these curious red-gray chips. They're attracted by a magnet. They're about 1/16 of an inch long. They zoom in, well, they do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, and what do they find? They find the evidence of thermite, and a very particular form of thermite. But the XEDS finds that you have iron oxide and aluminum powder, the ingredients of thermite, in all of these unignited chips of nanothermite. How do they know they're nanothermite? Because then they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. What are they doing in the World Trade Center dust? They're set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. Organic material is what makes TNT give its explosiveness. So here we have an incendiary that's been engineered to become more explosive. So they find when they heat these up in a differential scanning calorimeter, which is a heater, that they produce a lot more energy after they're heated up, indicating they're an energetic material, thermitic energetic component. So what happens when these go off at 758 degrees Fahrenheit? They also release molten iron microspheres, almost naked to the human eye. What's interesting about that is these are molten iron, so temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees. Well, this is exactly what the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, finds in all of their dozens and dozens and dozens of toxicological studies on the dust. And they document, hey, they have all these previously molten iron microspheres, but they have no idea where they came from. But they're ubiquitous. There's so many of them that they identify it as a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. Well, where do they come from? Molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter.
It's a very sophisticated chemical compound.
Well, especially when you get it to the nanoscale.
I mean, there are people on the internet who would have us believe that a collision by the airplane and some sort of chemical reaction between the airplane fuel and components of the air conditioning in the building could cause this thermite.
This is how desperate they are to try to explain away this forensic
There's no way
evidence.
Something like that could result
No,
in
you can't grind an airplane against steel beams and have it produce nanoparticles of iron oxide and aluminum powder, 3/4 to 1/4 set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, dual-layered red-gray chips throughout all the World Trade Center dust.
Highly sophisticated manufacturing process.
Yes, this is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. I mean, this material's absolutely incredible.
Was there some sort of patent issued in 2006 for a paintable thermite compound?
That I don't know, but there are patents that were issued after 9/11, before 9/11, with that are thermite cutter charges, and igniters that their casings themselves are made of consolidated thermite, so that all that would be left in the aftermath would be molten iron. And this is what the iron workers, the structural engineers, including the World Trade Center structural engineer himself, Leslie Robertson, finds a river of steel flowing. The first responders talk about flowing like lava, molten steel. And this is incredible. In addition to the hundreds of first responders and others talking about hearing explosions when? Before the towers collapsed. There's all of these explosions.
And these aren't lay people. These are experienced New York firefighters who are...
Oh yeah, these are credible first responder testimonies. And this is all documented by Graham McQueen in his paper, which is peer-reviewed on the Journal of 9/11 Studies. And so this evidence is backed up by all of this testimony as well from first responders and many, many others. So we'll also get into the evidence of these explosive ejections from the towers that are occurring 20, 40, even 60 stories down below this zone of destruction up above. Where do they come from? Why are they so highly focalized? Why are they clocked by physicists at 160 to 200 feet per second? Those are propelled by explosive speeds. This is extraordinary evidence that's been assembled here, which is, by the way, on our landmark documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. Just go to YouTube and search Experts Speak Out. It comes right up at the top. Almost 1 million views on this video now, with 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence, all of which we expect to be brought into the grand jury investigation as expert witnesses. How does that work, Dave? How do they
well,
go
there's
about
an important thing I just wanted to mention, too. There's evidence to show that there was explosions in the basement area before the planes even hit. That's very significant. Professor Rousseau is a professor out in France.
Robert Rodriguez?
Dr. Rousseau, too, yeah. That this very significant. There's Willie Rodriguez, that he's a layperson. He worked there, but there's a professor that studied the seismic reports. And he says from the seismic readings, it's indicative of explosions. It wasn't earthquakes, explosions in the towers prior to the building being hit by an airplane and prior to the collapse of the buildings. This is very significant. That's evidence that was not before the 9/11 committee that we know of, the investigation committee. They never assessed that evidence, but it's evidence that the FBI would have been aware of and should have made an assessment. Now, you asked me a question, Jason. What was that in reference to? You just posed a question previous to that.
Spoliation of evidence.
Okay. Well, in reference to that, as we know, it's been documented that all that metal was cut up, was shipped out to New Jersey, cut up and sent overseas. Right. So now you have crime scene evidence that you normally would send your forensic people in there, and they would document that. They would save samples. They would take photographs, and they would be experts that would go in there and look at this, the worst crime ever committed in the country probably, and that wasn't done. So you were asking why, boy, that should have been done. It wasn't done. What should have been done, the firemen should have been doing the same thing. It wasn't done. And that from day one, everything, everywhere seemed to be happening similar, where the authorities weren't normally doing what they were supposed to be doing.
And what would the police normally do in a situation where evidence is deliberately destroyed?
What would the
people doing the destruction of evidence? Do the police hold them?
Oh yeah, no, that would be serious. Now the police would have orders to prevent that, and if people were doing that against some orders, then I would think they would probably be arrested. But I don't know who was doing the orders and things of that nature. Maybe the grand jury will look into that. That's something for them. Where you could be a grand jury asking that very question, and the U.S. attorney says, "Well, let's find out. Let's subpoena somebody and bring them in." Right. That's what they would do. Now there were 5 companies that were contracted to remove that, so they would be people that you would want to talk about. Those 5 companies, people with material information, they're in our petition in different ways. The one for the public is that we say exactly what I just said. There are 5 companies that were contracted to remove that debris. And these are people of material information. We're not saying they did anything other than they would know information that could lead you to the solving of this crime.
It felt like they were removing it almost immediately. How did they get those 5 companies contracted so quickly?
Good question. Again, that would be for the grand jury too. I mean, the lawyers committee could go into that, but we'd be trying to go into so many other things. But that's a good question. That would be a good question a juror would ask the U.S. attorney. How did that happen so fast? How fast did it happen? Why these particular companies? And what exactly did they remove? What sections of the area did they have? Some areas people might have been removing the building 1 material, the building 2 material, the building 7 material. What happened to that material? Who was in charge of that? That's what you would start to sort of figure out what you're asking. It's a very good question, and it would take a lot of work to probably put it all together because there's a lot of debris that went out of there. Right.
I think a lot of people feel there are numerous indicators of potential foreknowledge of the event. For instance, the BBC announced the collapse of Building 7 while the building was still standing.
Well, that was it, and also the people that were arrested in New Jersey filming it, they said they were, apparently when they were released and they went back home, they basically said that they were there to document the event. Would ask you a question, how can you know that to be set up on the top of a moving van with cameras and with photos and be celebrating and filming the event supposedly around 9 o'clock in the morning? Right when the first plane was hitting at 8:48 around, second plane hadn't hit, I think it's 9:03, and they're there supposedly, and the woman who actually saw them took the plates down and with the binoculars, and you know, she recorded it. There was the New Jersey State Police were involved in developing 76 8x10 photos, 3 sets they gave to the FBI, that's New Jersey State Police, of what happened there, but the public has never had access to those photos or seen those photos, and certainly the 9/11 Commission never was advised of those photos or what the significance is. I don't know what the significance is, but it's certainly information that seems relevant to the crimes, because it seems like maybe there was pre-knowledge of the crimes, and certainly was a documentation of the crimes, and then there was a celebration, which maybe has nothing to do with anything, but nevertheless it should all be you know, considered as to what was going on. This was a company called Urban Moving Van in New Jersey, very suspicious company. It seemed like a front for intelligence agencies. It didn't seem like a legitimate moving company.
And certainly in your role as a lawyer and previously as a police officer, you're very sensitive to making any accusations that aren't based entirely in evidence.
Right.
You and the FBI refer to these individuals as the high-fivers. Many people on the internet, I think, refer to them as the dancing Israelis because there are potential links to Mossad. Now, even if these individuals are working for Mossad or individual contractors hired by Mossad, is it correct to assume that because they work for Mossad, the entirety of 9/11 was carried out by Mossad?
Not at all. I mean, I'm speaking as myself, not from the Lawyers Committee. No. You have rogues in every organization, and it could be rogue elements, certainly. Most of the agencies are very good people, honorable people, and they really care about the country. But you can get people in controlling positions in all countries, not just the United States, and if those rogue elements aren't checked, then they do things perhaps like we're experiencing. So what this is doing is put a check to that, and let's get our country back. We've seen a rollback of all our constitutional rights since that time. It's just been terrible. So if you talk about privacy rights, or if you're talking about your Fourth Amendment rights, if the NSA can spy on people 24/7, if you can just arrest people because of you say they're a terrorist or something like that, with any charge or any proof, and confine them indefinitely, if you can order, or executive can order the bombing of people and killing them with drone attacks, in keeping people indefinitely locked up without charging, without giving them attorneys. That's just a violation of due process in every which way. That should never be counted. It's a violation of your Fourth Amendment to have protection in your houses against the illegal searches and seizures, etc., of your material, your emails, and your telephone text messages, etc., being seized. None of that could have happened but for 9/11. Everything's been rolled back since then, and what we want to do is to reclaim the heritage which is America. What is so significant about the United States of America is its Bill of Rights and its Constitution. If it's lived up to, it's almost like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the people are not living up to it. They're not caring about it, and it's there to protect them and serve them in every which way. And that's what we want to do, is to make sure that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is adhered to, and that the law of the land, this is a congressional law that under the Administration Procedure Act, that the FBI was supposed to assess this information, and it was supposed to present it, and it was supposed to, that information, which was not considered by the original 9/11 Commission, this information, all we've talked about, all that Richard's talked about, is information, or not information, evidence. It's evidence that should have been included, should be reviewed, still should be reviewed, and let make their assessment. Let the FBI make their assessment. Let the good guys in the FBI make the assessment. The people that are, and when I say good, just objective and truth-seeking people. There's no spin on it. let's just get to the facts here. That's what we want. We want to get the facts. We want to get our country back, and we got to get it going in the right direction. So this lawsuit,
Hey,
all right, here he is. This is Mick Harrison. He's going to have a big announcement to make for you.
Okay. Let's just put it up. There you go, Nick.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be starting, just quick announcement, we'll be starting our formal press conference in just a couple of minutes now that Mick's here, but maybe we can hear something from him about that real quick.
Well, the main thing is we just accomplished a filing in the U.S. District Court here in D.C. of the lawyers' committees, architects and engineers, and Bob McIlvaine's lawsuit against the FBI. And what we're seeking, as you probably already know by now, is an order from the federal court directing the FBI to go back and satisfy the congressional mandate to assess all evidence related to 9/11 not considered by the original 9/11 Commission that was known to the FBI by at least 2014, and that includes, as either you have heard or you soon will hear, 7 categories of evidence, not the least of which is the demolition evidence developed by architects and engineers. So that filing was accomplished literally minutes ago, and so the suit is now proceeding.
All right. Congratulations, my man.
So,
all right.
We'll move over to our congratulations, Mick.
Thank you.
So let's unhook you temporarily.
Yep.
And you want to hook him up later for?
Sure. We're going over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay.
We're going to do the press conference. Another one. This is Jason Goodman. This is Jason. I don't know if you know.
This one?
Yeah, this is Jason right here. Yep. Did you have any problems? Or did it go all right?
It took a while, but we got it.
Good.
I think
They just told us that.
Whoa. I got so many different microphones hooked up here, it's hard to know which is which. Okay, Richard, what's happening next?
Mick has just told us that they filed a lawsuit. So we're going to
Appreciate your
do a press conference right now. So that's pretty exciting. So we're going to line up over here.
All right.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute.
Mick's got a microphone.
Let me do this.
He's going to need another one.
But wherever you can find a spot.
All right.
Sorry.
Pretty tightly packed.
Yeah, you sure are. There we go. Okay.
You're Jason?
Yes.
Hey, I'm Mick.
Good to meet you in person. Well, guys, yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, we one man. No, I got it. I got it on my shoulder. All right. Getting very scientific.
So do we have a plan, or shall we just proceed as
We don't have a plan.
Okay.
So
let me give the basics.
Yeah.
Maybe go to you for the demolition.
For the makeup man.
Why don't you introduce everybody first?
Yeah,
Just
okay.
real
I
quick.
will.
And then
And I'll do my basics, and I'll go to you, and then to Dave, and then to Bob, maybe.
yeah, and then take Q&A.
And then take Q&A. That sounds like a plan.
We're live here. It never stops.
Now, are we live, or are we about to be live?
We're live with Jason.
Okay, we are live. Very good. So hello to everybody who may be watching and listening. Didn't realize you were there. But glad you're there. Are we waiting on a cue, or shall we? Good to go?
You ready?
Okay.
All right. So good afternoon, folks. My name is Mick Harrison. I'm an attorney and litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And with me is David Meiswinkle, who is the president of the board of the Lawyers Committee, Bob McIlvaine, a 9/11 family member and longtime advocate for 9/11 Truth, and Richard Gage, the president of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And we do have an important announcement for you today. I'll give you the basics and let my colleagues add the details, and then we'll take some questions. So today, literally moments ago, we filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia a 7-count federal complaint asking the federal court to order the Federal Bureau of Investigation to comply with an important federal mandate regarding 9/11. That federal mandate requires the FBI to conduct an external assessment of all 9/11 related evidence that was not considered by the original 9/11 Commission that was known to the FBI, and to report that evidence and that assessment to Congress. In our research and investigation, and when I say ours, I mean the architects and engineers, the Lawyers Committee, and some associated family members, including Bob, we determined that there are at least 7 categories of 9/11 related evidence that was not assessed by the new 9/11 Review Commission established by the FBI in a purported effort to satisfy this congressional mandate. So we are asking the federal court to order the FBI to fully comply with the mandate, to go back to the drawing board and to assess this important evidence. Now, I'll give you the short version of what the evidence is that we're asking to be assessed. But before I do that, let me just make clear, this is a suit to compel a federal agency to perform a mandatory duty. I emphasize the word mandatory, non-discretionary. So Congress imposed this duty on the FBI, and the FBI failed to comply. So this lawsuit is ordering compliance, and the 7 categories of evidence that we're focused on in this complaint, the first and the most extensive is the evidence of the controlled demolition of 3 World Trade Center towers on 9/11, the Twin Towers in Building 7, and you'll hear from Mr. Gage here in a minute about more details of that evidence. The short version is, notwithstanding a decade of very public discussion of this evidence, developed by I don't know how many chemists, physicists, architects, engineers, the FBI and its 2015 Review Commission completely ignored that evidence. You won't even see it mentioned in their 2015 report. Now remember what Congress required them to do: assess any evidence related to 9/11 and the attacks known to the FBI that was not assessed by the original commission. Now, if you go back to 2004 and the Hamilton-Keene Commission, you won't see any discussion of controlled demolition in that report. You also don't see it in the new 2015 Commission's report, which means that the FBI failed to comply with its mandate. Now, you might be wondering, how can we prove that the FBI knew of the controlled demolition evidence? And the short answer is, apart from the fact that Mr. Gage has been broadcasting it worldwide for about 10 to 15 years, 12 years, we actually have 2 documents which show that the FBI was informed of Richard Gage and his colleagues' work. One of them, the FBI actually says, you know, it's very thorough work, and we're going to look at it. So that's the short version. Now, we're also talking about other evidence that was ignored by the new commission. In addition to the demolition evidence, some of you know that on 9/11, several individuals were arrested because they were observed celebrating the attacks on the Trade Center. And these folks, who self-identified as Israelis, were held in custody. They were interviewed by the FBI at some length, eventually were deported. But the FBI has extensive reports about this incident, and that evidence is not addressed in either the original commission or the new commission. So that's a second count. A third category of evidence that was ignored has to do with the Saudi support and other international support for the 9/11 terrorists, and that evidence is part of this lawsuit. We also are complaining and directing the federal court to require an assessment of evidence related to the videos from the Pentagon that no one has seen yet. We also want an assessment of the evidence of the plane parts that were recovered after the crashes. And last, it would be an analysis of the evidence related to phone calls, both cell phone calls and air calls from the airplanes on 9/11. So let me turn this over to my colleague, Dave Meiswinkle, and we'll go around and have everyone speak, and then we'll take some questions. Dave?
Thank you, Mick. This is a very significant action here on behalf of the, on behalf of the people of this country. It's symbolic that we are here in Pennsylvania Avenue, and the Capitol is right down the street. And we're actually doing and asking the federal court to do what should have been done all along. And all we've been ever asking for is a thorough, proper, objective, honest investigation. We've done what we could to get a grand jury moving in New York City with what we say is dispositive evidence of controlled demolition, pre-planted explosives and bombs in the buildings there. But this takes the action, at least of the Lawyers Committee, that's committed to transparency and accountability, another step further. What we're doing now is we're opening up the process, because these counts transcend or move to some extent even beyond New York City. So the counts that Mick mentioned, having to do with cell phone communications and airphones, they could be, there's information that was should have been assessed and that was never considered by the original 9/11 Commission. This actually is evidence that would connect, or could connect, the various, at least the incident in Pennsylvania with United 93, and with the incident allegedly with American Flight 77 that allegedly hit the Pentagon. Those telephone calls, along with the plane parts that Mick mentioned, the serial numbers on those plane parts are very indicative to identify what planes hit what buildings, and they get a confirmation that this plane actually did hit this building. In particular in Washington at the Pentagon, there is a lot of questions regarding that, etc., in other areas also. So that is something that this is evidence that certainly the FBI has, that they were required to assess, and that the 9/11 Commission originally never considered, and that these reports were never given to Congress, never been updated on these developments and this evidence, this crucial evidence. In addition to the cameras right here in Washington, D.C. on the Pentagon. There are cameras that the public is not aware of. Certainly the FBI would be aware of these cameras, and certainly the 9/11 Commission was never aware or made aware of the cameras and whatever the footage is that it shows. So they were not able to really consider that information or that evidence either. So what it's done now, this suit, and Mick also mentioned the Saudi connection. He also mentioned the reference to the high fivers, and there's some consideration as to how these people were, where they were at the time they were there, what they were doing there celebrating, and there's a lot of mystery around that. There are reports, we've read the reports, FBI reports, but there's no indication in any of the official narratives as far as the 9/11 Commission they were aware of it, or at least never considered it. So this is all very important evidence that starts to open up the process. What we've asked before is that the law enforcement do what they're mandated to do. If they did what they were supposed to do, I don't think we would be here at all. This crime would have been solved way back in 2001 when it happened. We wouldn't have had our constitutional rights rolled back. We want to have an incipient police state at our door knocking, and that's why it's really important to address these crimes. Americans' heart and soul was lost that day. The country's constitution was hijacked that day, and we want to do is get the Constitution working like it's supposed to, allow the Bill of Rights to do what it's supposed to do, and that's protect us, and to protect us against government. We're asking government to do their job. And as Mick said, this is a declaratory and injunctive relief we're asking for. It's just to say, Judge, tell these agencies to do their job, their duty. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they get paid to do. Now, Richard Gage is the foremost probably in the world as reference to evidence at Ground Zero. So I'm going to turn that over to Richard and to Bob to talk about the Ground Zero evidence. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mick. And thank you, Bob. We're going to be hearing from Bob real quickly because his son was killed, murdered at the Twin Towers on 9/11 by the explosions for which we have so much evidence before the towers collapsed. And there's some indications that these explosions occurred before the plane even hit that particular building. Bob will discuss that. But as an architect of 30 years, I was shocked to learn that a third tower came down on 9/11, because I didn't hear anything about it from the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm one of the 80,000 members. I didn't know that there were explosions that were heard before this building came down, heard by witnesses and documented on camera. Documented on camera, which the FBI saw and acknowledged in this letter that they wrote Harold Save in Florida, because he had the insight to submit that first documentary of ours called 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, in which we documented all of this evidence. And the Assistant Director, Counterterrorism Division at the FBI, was forwarded that DVD by Mueller, the Director of the FBI at the time. And Michael Heimbach says, this letter is in response to your correspondence dated November 7th, 2008, to Director Robert S. Mueller III, in which you urged the FBI to consider the work of Mr. Richard Gage, founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and his supporters in the ongoing federal investigation into the World Trade Center attacks. The Director's office forwarded your letter to the Counterterrorism Division for direct response to you. First, let me thank you for offering to provide information to the United States government, where we have been doing that now for 12 years without success. So we're seizing the opportunity to take legal action against the FBI. Back to the letter. First, let me thank you for offering to provide this information. The FBI receives this information the FBI receives from concerned individuals is critical to its mission of protecting the U.S. and its citizens against terrorism. So they're acknowledging that this is critical information in writing. As with all cases, the FBI will continue to examine the 9/11 investigation from every angle as new evidence develops, utilizing all leads available. Mr. Gage presents an interesting theory. We're presenting facts, by the way, but they like to call these theories. But he goes on, backed by thorough research and analysis. So they've already done the assessment, which was not reported to the 9/11 Review Commission. So all we want them to do is report that assessment in more detail as mandated by Congress. Backed by thorough research and analysis, the case agents in charge of the investigation will undoubtedly review all relevant information before making an unbiased decision. So this is what we're expecting them to do, what Congress mandated and what they've actually agreed in writing to do. Now, what did that evidence include? It included the third skyscraper to collapse on 9/11, a 47-story skyscraper that drops like a rock at free fall acceleration, as fast as a bowling ball falling down from the sky after witnesses hear explosions. The aftermath reveals the evidence of thermite incendiaries, pools of molten iron. We haven't used molten iron for 100 years in our skyscrapers. So how does it get to be iron? Where did that come from? How did it get to be molten, 2,800 degrees? NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, says that the temperatures were only, of office fires, they only burned 20 minutes in a given area. So they couldn't have caused the thermal expansion of the, which NIST claims is the cause of the initiation of collapse. More to the point, they couldn't have melted the steel. But steel melted. More accurately, iron melted. Where did that come from? Where did the sulfur come from? That FEMA, in their Appendix C of their May 2002 report, says hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel of World Trade Center 7 and the Twin Towers. Where does that come from? Where does the sulfur come from? Well, thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So, we've got the evidence of thermite incendiaries in the form of red-gray chips throughout the World Trade Center. We have the evidence of incendiaries, thermite particularly, in the form of previously molten iron microspheres, billions of them. 10 tons of this material found is the residue of thermite. The U.S. Geological Survey doesn't tell us where these came from. But they could only have come from these red-gray chips, which are also found, about 10 tons of that material in red on one side, gray on the other. They're attracted by a magnet. They're examined by X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy and a nuclear microscope to find the nanoparticles of iron oxide and aluminum powders comprising these. The very sophisticated material found only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. All of this information and a lot more in 2 hours of documentary was presented to the FBI, and they squashed it. So we're very fortunate to have this opportunity 18 years later to get this evidence into the record. And that is more important to no one more than Bob McIlvaine, who's here with us. As I mentioned, his son Bobby was killed that day. And Bob has been relentless for more than 18 years in trying to seek justice, not just for his son, but for all the victims and their family members that died on 9/11. Bob?
Thank you, sir. I don't know if has anyone seen Silent Witness on Netflix? It's an English show, great show. Pathologists go to a murder scene and they look at the body, then go in for a post-mortem, and they get very involved in the investigation of the murder or whatever happened, whether or not it was a murder or an accident, so forth and so on. Well, Bobby's like a silent witness. That's the name of the show. It's called Silent Witness. And in Britain, it was on for like years and years and years. Best show I've ever seen. That's why I always think about it when I watch it. Well, Bobby, at first, we got a body that week. Bobby was found minutes after the towers were hit, and was taken, and he had a post-mortem done on Tuesday morning, on First Street. Of course, I didn't have the guts to look at the body. They told me not to. I really regret that I did, because the injuries were just so bad. It was I'm not going to get upset. But he took a blast to here and here. I'm sorry. But I really never, again, looked into that. But with all this stuff that is coming out, especially about the seismic readings up in Columbia University, and Bobby didn't work at the towers. He worked at Merrill Lynch, was across West Street. So no one can, there must have been 100 phone calls made to Bobby, so he had his phone. People will say, well, how do you know he wasn't on the 106th floor? Well, if he was on the 106th floor, I don't think he died instantly. And of course, many people say, well, did he jump? I said, no, it's impossible, because we called him at least 100 times. I mean, friends, neighbors, everyone was calling about, what was happening. And no one got a hold of him. So through the years, but anyway, that's what I've been doing, is investigating, finding out what happened to him, and of course who did it. Now his injuries, I don't want to go into it, but he took a huge blast to the head and the chest. It almost looks like someone had a couple shotguns hitting him with a shotgun. And he died instantly. And he didn't have burns on him. He had, and this is the way it was explained to me, he was hit and driven back, God knows how far. I never found the nurse. I think I know who she is, but I think she's so messed up she can't do anything anymore. But she found them and took them to the morgue. The ambulance took him to the morgue. But anyway, so he was, I don't know how many feet away, or the detonation, I don't know how many feet away he was. But anyway, he had post-mortem, or not post-mortem burns, but he had, post-mortem burns. In other words, he was hit by a big blast, and then the heat, the detonation, the heat follows that. So then he caught some heat, on his legs and so forth and so on. I had pictures of that. But my whole thing is, and it's important to me, and I've gone around the world talking about this. It eliminates the Muslims in this. I don't care what people say about the Muslims and planes and so forth and so on, but I'm 100% sure Bobby died before the planes hit. So unless we can prove that Muslims put those bombs or detonations in there in the towers, then they're off the hook as far as my son's death is concerned. I have no beef against Muslims. You can't prove to me Muslims have anything to do. I'm not saying Muslims were or play, I don't know. But the thing is, that's why I feel Bobby is a silent witness. I feel good about it. And what's happening today is the fact that these people are now talking beyond what Richard's done is phenomenal. She's convinced my wife, that something happened on 9/11. She didn't want anything to do with it. I don't blame her. But she saw Richard's movie, and she's on board. My sister calls me. She's on board. But then we have to take it a step further, and what they're bringing in the complaint, they're talking about the swords, they're talking about different things that happened on 9/11 that haven't been answered. And I remember being down here in 2002 with the Jersey girls, and we went to see Mueller. And he just ignored us. They were asking the same questions in this complaint. What about the swords? What about this? What about that? And he just ignored us. He says, nothing to see. Well, I know, I went berserk. I was so upset. So what I've done over the years, I read history. That's all I do is read history. And it makes me feel, it's almost impossible to say, can our country do something like that? It really is. People can't put their hands on it. Well, if you read history, you can see that things like this happen all the time. Sometimes I feel guilty complaining about my son being lost, when the millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of people have died in a century for no damn reason whatsoever. And that's what people have to realize. This is what empires do. The British Empire did that forever, and we've taken up that mantle. I'm not blaming just one specific country or anything, but that's why I say Bobby is a silent witness. The fact that, just that fact alone, that he did not die by the hands of Muslims, then we got a big time problem. Who in the hell put those explosions in there, or detonations in there? And I stand by that. And I can go to court, but this coming up is monumental, because now other people are talking about deep state, and other people are talking about other things that are happening in the world, talking about 9/11. And there are, I've been contacted by millions upon millions of people around the world that are on board, but they just don't have the information. And a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon as far as the destruction of the towers, but they have to go further than that. They really have. You have to work hard. You really have to work hard. And I think this is provide the impetus to do that. So that's my thing. Yeah.
Could you tell us about the Bobby McIlvaine Act, and what can people do to help this process? That's one question. We also happen to be in front of the museum, a kind of tabernacle of journalism. They have a 9/11 exhibit. But what can ordinary people seeing this do? And maybe several people can answer that.
Repeat the question. Sorry? Repeat the question.
Well, the question was, what can people do that look into this? What can they do to bring this out into the public, to bring it out amongst their friends, to bring it out in the newspapers? I don't know. I have had people that have tried this, and they've quit. All the 9/11 family members, how many are out there now? They've been trying. What about the Jersey girls? You could have tried harder than them to bring this to fruition. And then they just got blasted, and Coulter just crucified them on TV. So calling your congressman is a very important thing, and if you get congressman gets millions and millions of calls, but they're afraid to touch this with a 10-foot pole. So I think reading, become informed about what happened. Really, I think that's the most important thing, because then you can talk to someone about it. But other than that, it's very difficult. You know, you can jump on the architects and engineers, but then that will, you know, that's a good start for them.
And regarding the Bobby McIlvaine Act, here is draft legislation which Bob McIlvaine sponsored for us in many ways to bring to Congress legislation that forces an investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. So we have now taken this act and the petition signed by 3,000 architects and engineers. By the way, if 3,000 architects and engineers wrote you a letter saying your house was in danger of collapse, would you listen to them? Yeah. So we expect to be listened to. But the political climate is tough. And it continues to be tough, even with President Trump in office. We are not getting the disclosures that we really need to have. But we're relentless. I mean, this group has been at this for more than a decade, and 2 decades almost for many in the 9/11 truth movement. But we expect either the House or Senate to form a select committee to investigate this, or eventually, as more truth comes out, as people tire of the 9/11 wars, which President Trump seems to be continuing, and Obama continued after Bush before him, we expect that the American people will eventually wake up and tire of this, maybe because some of this information actually gets out in court through the FBI lawsuit that we filed today. Maybe through the U.S. Attorney's promise to impanel a grand jury to investigate these crimes, this crime of the century, which has instigated a $6.5 trillion war on terror, which continues. This is an ongoing issue. It's not a historical, obsolete piece of grave. I mean, people try to minimize this. It couldn't be more relevant for today's geopolitical climate. And that's why we've submitted this lawsuit, and I'll bet Mick and Dave have more to share about that.
Sure.
So, in terms of what folks can do, let me state the obvious. You can go to Architects and Engineers website. You can make a donation that would help us prosecute this lawsuit. You can go to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiries website, lcfor911.org. Make a donation. You can also volunteer your time if you have time to help. In addition to those obvious steps, I think Bob McIlvaine is right that educating yourself is a huge step, huge first step. And then the next step would be educating your congressperson. And let me point out what may not be obvious here is this lawsuit is basically doing Congress's work for them. Keep in mind, what we're suing on here is a congressional mandate to the FBI. We're forcing the FBI to do what Congress told them to do. So we're helping Congress achieve the goal that Congress laid out, which is assessment of all the 9/11 evidence. Now, when Richard says it's still relevant, you know, Congress considers it still relevant. Keep in mind, this new mandate was 2014. Okay, that was 13 years after 9/11, and Congress wanted to know from its FBI the current assessment of all the new evidence. And they didn't get that from their FBI. And that's why we're suing, to make sure that Congress is informed of this new evidence, gets the assessment of the FBI and its external commission on that new evidence, and report it to Congress. And when they report it to Congress, we're going to get it. So this is basically a right-to-know suit. It's not about trying to prove one theory or another about what happened on 9/11. It's about informing all of us and the Congress on all the evidence available so we can all make up our own minds and then decide what to do. Dave?
Sure. in my life, I've taken the oath 3 times, basically to protect and defend the Constitution. I did that as a soldier, United States Army. I did it as a policeman, and I did it as an attorney. Now, I speak right here as just myself. I don't want to say this is what the Lawyers Committee would say, but this is what I say, at least in my assessment, is that there has been, since 9/11, a dumbing down intentionally by the media, the Americans' perspectives. And thank God for alternative media that have kept the truth alive and have left investigative journalism as something that is a true vocation and an honorable occupation. That presently, as Mick said, and as Richard said, and as Bob said, education is very important, is how you educate yourself. The Lawyers Committee website, the Architects and Engineers website are key areas to go, lc4911truth.org or lc4911.org or AE911truth.org are excellent sources. But there's a realization too, in sort of esoteric sciences, they talk about your third eye, that's in the middle of your forehead, that sort of could be being calcified with the junk media that we receive. We have to clear out that third eye. That's our eye that allows us to dream, to have visions, to have insights, to step it beyond where we are and to get out of this muck and mire. So it needs a real assessment of what we are as an American, where we're going, the direction, and 9/11 is the focal point where things really started getting bad. So we have to go back, find out what happened there, prosecute the people that were responsible, reclaim our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and be the Americans that we all envision ourselves to be and should be, and don't let anyone change that, any political party, any lobby, any interest, special interest, but let's all be American and love our freedom, and let's be honorable to our neighbors in the world and truly be that beacon of light that the world craves and is disappointed the United States is not doing what we all believe it should be doing. Let's step out, and this is an action to do that. We're stepping out. There's more actions to come, but this is a very important opportunity now to get the courts to order the Federal Bureau of Investigation to do what they're supposed to do. Thank you very much.
This building, the museum, is where 5 years ago there was an anniversary of the 9/11 Commission meeting right upstairs, and most of their focus was on defense contracts and improved security. They rented the building, but what significance do you place that you're in front of the museum of the news industry that hosted this 9/11 meeting 5 years ago? I believe they rented the space, but it was still right here.
Well, let me add my thoughts and I'll pass it around for folks. The immediate thought for me is that, and this is true for the 9/11 Review Commission too, what they focused on in their report wasn't the new evidence that would help us really understand what happened on 9/11, who was responsible, and why. What they focused on was fine-tuning the FBI, the CIA, improving the intelligence community and their procedures. And here's the problem with that. Until we know who was responsible for this crime of the century and exactly how they accomplished it and what their purposes were, none of this other fine-tuning of intelligence agencies means a damn. Because until you get to the bottom of, who was responsible and you put those folks in jail, they're still out there doing their thing. And we're not protected, and we're never going to be protected until we get the truth out.
Well, listen, the irony is that we are here, to answer your question, Andrew, that we are in front of a building that you would think that the freedom of the press and truth would be very significant. But as we've seen, as I mentioned before, there seems to be a dumbing down of the news. And I get my news for the most part through alternative media, and media sort of like Jason Goodman's media and other media, where they really use a Socratic method, and they have a dialogue, and they go back and forth to try to get to the truth. And that's what we're doing, and that's what Mick said. And really important, underline it, the people that committed these crimes are still at large. They're still at large. And they will be encouraged to do more things if they're not brought to justice. So an example has to be set to protect all of us. And as we get older with kids and grandkids, we're leaving them this heritage, either one of freedom or one of the exact opposite. So I would say that the truth is what we're after, and here in front of this building, unfortunately, that's not their primary mission, is to give us the truth. And that's what our lawsuit is all about.
Well, I made, I'd say, 99% of the 9/11 Commission hearings, and it was a disgrace, and they're all a disgrace. Yet they admit it. They admitted that it was a sham. They didn't have the opportunity to do what they're going to do. But then to have these commissioners here, you know, they're cowards. I mean, they came out. Hamilton came out and said it was a sham. Max Cleland, you know, it was just, people would leave there so angry. You know, you talk to the press and you try to be civil, but sometimes it's so difficult to be civil because you know they were just stalling. You know, there was no, you know, just everyone was lying. I hate to get back to Mueller, but you know, he come up there, he stands up there and lies. Everybody was lying. There was no subpoenas. You know, the main thing is you got 5 minutes to interview a witness, and that's all they would get. You can't go anywhere with that 5 minutes. So for these people to be here talking about the defense industry spending more money, you know, they sold out, and they, you know, maybe some of them were trying to do their job. I know Max Cleland was, Curry, I think he was, but they didn't have a chance. I would do it in there. I would lose my temper beyond imagination. But finally, it was amazing how suddenly all the news people were over with you, because I was just so ticked off. And the fact that they were here doing that, you know, if I were here, I'd be out here demonstrating. And I would call them sons of bitches as they walked out the door. They're cowards. They absolutely are cowards. They live by the system, and the system is making them rich. And they know what happened on 9/11. Any idiot knows what happened. They don't know it, but they're not even qualified to be idiots. They're beyond that. So that's my feeling about those things.
John Farmer, the attorney of the 9/11 Commission, wrote a book, and in that book, he said at some point there was a decision not to tell the people, the American people, the truth about 9/11. Other commissioners, in fact, I believe it was Bob Kerrey, said that they were set up to fail. That alone is reason enough to demand a new investigation of 9/11, let alone all the evidence that we've been talking about here. Refer to David Ray Griffin, 9/11 Commission, Omissions and Distortions. Extraordinary work. Other questions?
Maybe a last one for me. There was a reference to a meeting with Bob Mueller as FBI director. Who was in that meeting, and when and where was it?
Well, it was the Jersey Girls. I mean, the Jersey Girls, I don't know how many people know the Jersey Girls, but they were out front. And I just sort of was behind them watching. But, you know, they would have events, I'd be there. Well, it was after one of the commission hearings, they wanted to see Mueller. So he actually came to the FBI building. I don't know the exact date. I remember John Judge, who was very involved in 9/11. And he said, well, let's go over to see him. So I just sort of walked in the back door, and the Jersey Girls were asking all the questions. And then it just ended abruptly. You know, every question they threw at him, he just wouldn't answer it. And to me, it was very smug. And I lost my temper. I went after him. I don't know what I would have done if I got to him, but I lost my temper. And FBI agents were very nice and just grabbed me. And it started right there. They weren't giving me answers. It was a cover-up from the beginning.
Well, he's in the news. Why do you think he did it? Is there a higher power? Could he have, it's speculation, but could he have answered questions, or what is your sense?
Of course he knows exactly what happened. You know, I go back, to me all this starts with Iran-Contra. He was there when they got pardons. You know, these people should have been put in jail for the rest of their life. And some of these people are in the administration right now. Well, that's what he does. He covers up things. He was, district attorney, I don't know exactly what he was.
A fixer.
Yeah, he's a fixer. Well, when did he come to this story after 9/11? What, 2 days after 9/11? I don't know exactly what it was, but this is his job.
1 week prior.
Well, 1 week prior, was it? Yeah, I know. So then suddenly he's the man. We're going to take his information? I mean, it was ridiculous. So hearing all these people in the commission hearings, and then, again, I went, the Jersey girls, they had asked for it, and I just popped in on my own. I wasn't with them, and it was just crazy.
Mueller, excuse me, guys. Mueller said in a group in San Francisco that the terrorists were so good that they didn't leave a shred of evidence.
Yeah. Mueller said to a group in San Francisco that the terrorists were so good that they didn't leave a shred of evidence. That's cute.
Except his passport that flew out the window.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That they failed.
So I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the press conference today. Most especially the attorneys who worked so hard, Dave Meiswinkle and Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Again, you can help a lot, because the filing of this lawsuit is just the beginning. They put a lot of work into this without being reimbursed. So we not only are raising funds for the work that's been done, because I don't know how they paid their rent for the last so many months of work on this, but for all the work that has yet to come, preparing for the expected motion to dismiss. There's a whole set of legal hoops that we will be put through. It takes hundreds of hours to do this work. And I want to encourage everybody today to go to lc4911.org. That's LC, Lawyers Committee, FOR 911.org, or AE911truth.org, and make your donation to this joint effort so that we can make sure that we're equipped in the legal battles to come. It's a lot of work, folks. Again, thanks so much. Do you want to close out, Mick?
Well, just a quick note. First of all, I have to say I'm proud to represent Richard and his organization and Bob McIlvaine and the Lawyers Committee in this lawsuit. And as a lawyer, I expect to win it. You might be surprised to hear that. Not every 9/11 litigation that's been tried in the past for citizens has had success. This one I expect to win, and for a very simple reason. All this evidence we're talking about is either in the hands of the FBI, which is true for I think 5 of the 6 categories, and the other category that Richard mentioned, they've acknowledged their awareness of the work of the architects and engineers and their plan to review it. So all we have to prove to win this case is that the evidence is 9/11 related, that the FBI knew about it, that the original 9/11 Commission did not consider it, and that the new Commission did not assess it. And I can tell you, if you read our complaint, black and white, on all 4 of those points for all 7 of these counts, we should win each one of these. So this is not a symbolic action. We expect to win it. We expect it to result in a new assessment of evidence to be given to Congress. And by doing that, we expect the American public to be better informed. So I appreciate your attention. Dave, do you have a close?
Just, yeah.
Where can people find that complaint?
The complaint will be posted on the Lawyers Committee's website. AE may post it, I don't know. If you have trouble finding it, contact me and I'll get it to you. But it should be on our website.
This is an important step, and it's not going to be our last step. We're so happy that you're covering this, and we hope that more and more people find out. What our experience is that when people seem to be ready for this information now, perhaps in the past they weren't. So as we proceed forward, We think there will be more attention paid to it, and we really are optimistic that there will be some kind of resolution positive in the long run, not only in this suit, but in further actions to come. So again, thank you, keep the faith, and let's get America back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Bob, we should get Bob here. All right,
Did you have something else?
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well, there we go.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Lou Wolf, a legend. There you go, guys.
You're the man. I want to be in touch with you.
Okay, do please, sir.
Would you consider writing something for the magazine that I co-founded, Covert Action?